Hello, everybody, and welcome to the experience. It's been a while, and I've missed you all so much. And today we have a really, really special guest, someone who is very near and dear to my heart, Mr. Paul Aurand. And I'm going to read a little intro for him just so you have an idea of who this magnificent man is. So Paul is a master hypnotherapist, and he was struck by lightning in July of 1998. His resulting near-death experience propelled him to on a search for a way to replicate the experience, and we're definitely going to be talking about that. So he's based in New York City, and if you don't know Paul, you should, and we're going to be giving information out about him. And he's worked in the field of hypnotherapy for nearly 30 years. And he's been honored as Educator of the Year, Therapist of the Year, Hypnotherapist of the Year. And he's been featured in films Flipside, On the Threshold, Dying to Know, and Discovering Regression Therapy for his groundbreaking work with NDE regression and Life Between Lives regression. So yes, I mentioned NDE and Life Between Lives regressions, and that's going to be a hot topic that we talk about today. So welcome, Paul. Thank you so much for being here. And you're frozen. There you are. Did you say something? You're on. Hi.
No, thanks for having me. I'm actually, when we're done here, I'll be packing for a trip to Canada where it's minus 22 right now, for the second half of a research project with a cardiologist up there. And he's gathered 20 patients that had sudden cardiac arrest and were all revived. Many of them report near-death experiences, don't really have the understanding of what they are, able to really describe them. They know something really profound happened and are trying to understand what that was. So we're regressing them back to a few moments before their heart stopped and before they were revived. And it is absolutely fascinating, interesting, mind-blowing for us and for them to hear their very detailed description. Watch the EMTs or the paramedics working frantically to revive them, carrying their bodies on stretchers downstairs into ambulances, trying to keep up with their body to go with it, and then describing, some of them don't go very far from their bodies, others do. Some meet loved ones that they knew of, perhaps, but never met in this life. Basically, they're all told, it's not your time, go back. And they're left with the question of why they came back. And trying to put in place this close encounter with death, realizing that even though their body is clinically dead, there's no brain activity, no heart function, except for when someone's reviving them, and realizing they're still alive and conscious and aware. One of the people we regressed was an operating room nurse, so has a real medical background. And it was interesting to hear her say, they think I'm in coma, but I'm not. I can hear everything they're saying. It's not uncommon after someone's had a heart attack for them to be put into a medical coma, so they can go on respiration on equipment to help them breathe so their body doesn't fight it. She knows all the procedures. She's actually commenting on how some of the procedures were done. She was a bit mad about them cutting them. Hear what they're saying. It's just fascinating and a special interest of mine because of my experience. But hypnosis is such an effective tool to help them gain that more expanded state of consciousness so that they're not limited so much by the mental mind, and are able to achieve, once again, that more expanded state where they can not just remember what's stored in the subconscious mind, but remember something beyond mental mind, beyond subconscious mind. And that's really soul memory. That's something we do in past life regression. It's something we do in womb regression, but it's really uncharted territory, this NDE regression. Michael Newton really wrote the map for between life regression, going from in past life into spirit, where people meet guides and loved ones. And he really spent many years charting that for us and then eventually teaching it to us.
Well, let's talk about those books briefly for those of my people watching that have never heard of this work, because it's mind-blowing. If this is interesting to you guys, definitely check out Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls for starters. And there are others to follow, but those are really the initial seminal works of Dr. Newton. Okay, sorry to interrupt, Paul.
No. And Memories of the Afterlife is one that was written by about 30 or 32 of the therapists that Michael trained. I was lucky enough to have the first chapter in that book, and my wife Sophia has a chapter in there as well. So that was the first contributions from therapists that he trained. He edited the book and writes amazing commentary in that. Yeah, it's just a continuation of what he began.
So, from my perspective, and, it's no secret that I'm also a hypnotherapist, and you are a very important mentor in my experience as a hypnotherapist. I've been trained by you, and I've become a teacher recently through you. But there is this similarity, this uncharted territory-ness of the spiritual world, and it seems that whether a person is getting there through an NDE or a past life regression, womb regression, or life between lives, or some other technique like Dolores Cannon, QHHT, or some such, there's so much to be explored. And I think what a lot of people don't know is that hypnotherapy can help, and this is what you're talking about, access these NDEs, these near-death experiences. And I think you've mentioned that, with these cardiac patients, many of these people don't even realize that they've had near-death experiences, and it's not until you've done the work to regress them into that experience that they actually have access to that expansive memory. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I really think it's all about consciousness. When I first trained in 1990, 91 in hypnosis, I think I had many of the misconceptions that many people have, that somehow you're asleep or unconscious or unaware. But the truth is, after practicing for many, many years, what's happening more than anything, I think, is that the mental mind, which stands guard, which keeps us safe, which analyzes and organizes things, it doesn't leave, but it releases its grip. It steps back a bit. And as mental mind steps back and becomes more of the observer, then the first thing that happens is deeper memories that are in the subconscious mind and in the body begin to rise up to the surface. Of course, in hypnosis, you use that phenomena to offer suggestions. That was my initial training, is suggestion-based therapy. But I realized pretty quickly that was pretty symptomatic treatment, that you needed to go deeper than that. So as mental mind steps back and you access memories, feelings, survival strategies in the subconscious mind, some of those programs that really influence how we operate in our day-to-day life, resolve some of that, you go deeper and you start to reach into the soul mind. That's the first memories that we recover during womb regression. Subconscious mind hasn't developed, analytical mind isn't fully developed yet. But this is a place where the incoming soul can, or where the client can remember the intention with which their incoming soul came. They can start to remember why they came, what they hoped to do, but also some of the experience they carry from the past, and now that influences them. And then, of course, in past life, we explore much of those kind of memories as well. Those aren't stored in subconscious mind. They come through it. They're not. They influence the body. They're carried in the body, but it's not from there. So, anyway, to go back to consciousness, as consciousness expands, you have more access, not just to these memories, but you have more access to another dimension that we're unaware of, that we live in all the time. It's a place where you can communicate with loved ones who are no longer in body. It's a place where you can meet your guides and gain deeper wisdom from them. It's a place that I love taking people to, because as their mental mind steps back and you get past the intellect, it helps people access the wisdom that's within themselves. They don't have to seek it from another person, but they can begin to tap into the inner healing ability and the inner wisdom that lives within them. And for me, that's so empowering, to give someone the ability to reconnect with what they really know in their deeper being, in their heart and in their soul, something beyond their mental mind.
It is so empowering, and I totally agree with you. It's a really fantastic exploration in that space. And so when you talk about how accessing the subconscious mind or the soul mind comes through the subconscious mind, could you share what you think is actually going on in terms of what consciousness actually is for people from your experience?
That's a big topic that there are many books written on, and I'm no expert in consciousness. I can speak to it from my own personal experience.
Yeah,
but
please do. There's no test afterwards. It's just, that's what the show is, the experience.
Yeah. So I think that, at least in our Western culture, we have great emphasis and focus on intellect, on the mental mind. And it's an important part of us, but there's much more to us than that. Although the mental mind, I think, if we start to go beyond it, it can be afraid it's going to lose control, or we'll realize there's something more than it. But right in the very beginning of the very first session that I do with someone, I have them step out of that mental mind. I have them learn to become the observer of the mental mind. Just notice what it is you hear your mind saying to you. And as you begin to do that, you're no longer caught on that merry-go-round of the mental mind. And your consciousness begins to expand. You have a higher consciousness, a broader view, a higher perspective. I want to achieve that in the first 5 minutes of a session. And it's from that higher perspective, from that broader perspective, from that expanded consciousness state, that we want to continue. A very different perspective of yourself and of the world.
Mind-blowing to people who've never contemplated from that point of view.
And some people have difficulty getting there. They're very locked into the controlling or analytical mind. They may be full of very difficult, painful feelings and memories that are protected or kind of locked down. And so if we have difficulty achieving that state initially, well, then I'll work to have them become aware of what the mind's concerns are, what it is it's saying to them. No, don't do this. Something bad will happen, or you're not ready for this. Or if I go there, I'm afraid I'll get in touch with these stored feelings. And oftentimes then that's our work. But once we achieve that state, then so much more can be done.
So I want to get a little bit deeper into your own personal experience, Paul, and what the electrocution, what being actually hit by a lightning bolt was like and what that did to your life.
Yeah. So just to go back to your question about consciousness, I said I would talk about it in personal terms. When
Sure.
I was briefly unconscious, some would say dead, it was definitely an NDE, a few important things that happened. One was the awareness that although my body's no longer functioning, I'm conscious, I'm aware. And out of body and free from mental mind, journeying into the spirit world to experience some of the things that, or think about, you have the ability to experience these things. And this is one of the profound aspects of both life between life work and NDE work, is that I experienced complete and total unconditional love. And I think as someone that's a bit of a seeker, I always strove for that, or wondered what that was like, or tried to live it as much as possible, but in a pretty limited way. I see a tail.
Hello, everybody.
Okay.
This is
a cat or a raccoon?
Luna. She wants to be present for this. She likes being on the show. Say hi, Lulu.
I was never interviewed by a cat before.
She's just the sidekick.
Okay. It's called the distraction induction. So experiencing unconditional love was one of the profound transformative aspects of my near-death experience. And then if you're going to talk about consciousness, I have things, no separation at all. And it's a little hard to describe, but I had a sense of self, my consciousness, I was aware of myself, but simultaneously, I was a part of all beings of all things. And we are all one, we're all connected. But it was a visceral experience of being all connected, having a sense of self, but no sense of separation at all. And after experiencing that, I was given the experience of becoming separate from that. And it's such a core wound, I think, that we all carry, feeling like we're different or separate. And I don't mean that we're not individuals, we are, but feeling like we're alone or apart from, I think, is one of the things that we all struggle with.
Absolutely.
But, yeah. So that being part of that universal sea of consciousness, again, is tremendously transformative.
So what would you relate in your day-to-day life to that feeling of unconditional love that you experience? Is that something that is humanly accessible outside of maybe a hypnotherapy session or an NDE?
Absolutely. So I think once you've had that experience, however you achieve it, whether it's hypnosis or regression or out-of-body experience or NDE or lucid dream or some other profoundly transformational spiritual experience, it makes you less judgmental. So something I've become aware of from my experience and from working with many, many people is that we have a human personality, right? And the personality of Paul can be judgmental. You know, just try driving down a busy highway and see what comes out of you sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So that's personality. But my soul character, my soul nature, my soul personality, it too, I'm not going to say it's completely free from judgment. That's one of my soul lessons. But that soul carries this unconditional love. And it's much easier to remember that. It's beyond remembering, but to be in that more loving state and be less judgmental. It isn't as much of an effort. And I think that's part of what I do this work for, is to help people make contact with that which lives within, so they can begin to express that more and more on a daily basis, ruled by mental mind and human personality.
Right. Not to sweat the small stuff. When you can have access to that aspect of yourself, to that fullness, it's like, oh, that's not such a big deal after all.
I heard a speaker recently, a brilliant metaphysical teacher speak. He said, "No, what I'm doing here is this is way beyond my personality, what my personality would want to do or can do, but I'm not ruled by my personality." I thought it was such a brilliant insight, you know, that even though we have our limitations as humans, the more we can tune into the divine wisdom, the soul that lives within us, and express that, then, well, it'd be a very different world, wouldn't it?
Oh my gosh. Well, and then you also get into the area of, are we what we are? You know, when people say, I am what I am, it is what it is. And it's like, well, is that actually true? Like, maybe you're more. Maybe that you're more than you're allowing yourself to be at any one given moment.
Absolutely. You know, I'll tell you from doing, especially the life between life work, those things that from a human perspective could be easy to judge or say is right or wrong, or good or bad. When you start to view some of these things from a soul perspective, these things are perfect, even though they may be difficult as a human experience, whether it's as the observer or the one having the experience. From a higher soul perspective, if you look at it as in terms of learning and growing, rather than it's a mistake or bad or wrong, you start to realize you better think twice before you name something or judge something. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would you have any experiences that would speak directly to that? I'm curious to know any stories that inform that. I mean, I know in my own family talking about it, they're like, wait a second. It just helps you. This perspective really helps. And so, yeah, please share any stories that you have that may be instructive to that experience for our listeners or viewers.
Well, I could talk about the first chapter in Memories. And that was a woman who came from Eastern Europe, really feeling a lot of shame and guilt, because 2 weeks before her dream wedding with her elementary school boyfriend, she met her soulmate. She met someone came waltzing into her life right before her wedding that just blew her away. And so all plans were made and had been made for years, really. So she went through the wedding, but could never really be with her husband. And her heart, her mind was somewhere else. She struggled for about a year and a half in that marriage, and then left. They separated for about a year, I suppose. And she was trying to get clarity about the situation. And she bumped into this guy again in another country. What are the chances of that? Mm-hmm. This is the universe conspiring, I'm sure. And they had an affair, in her words, which she then felt terribly guilty about, of course, because these kinds of things are not very well accepted in our society, our culture. Understand. And so she was ready then to divorce and make a commitment to this soulmate. And he said, no, he wasn't ready to make any commitment. And he sort of went off on his way. And she was just devastated, having lost him on top of all this. And that's what brought her in for her past life and the life between life regressions. And when she went to meet her counsel, these wise beings that people often meet in the sessions, she went with tremendous guilt and shame and fear of punishment. She had a religious background. And they said, no, we sent him to you. He came into your life to sort of break you open, to expand you, because you have much to do in this world. And he woke you up, basically. And that was his job, not to stay with her, but to break her out of this container. And it truly happened. It did break her open. I saw her again about 2 years later, and she was back with her husband. They were living happily. She came, she still carried some guilt from it, even though they'd said this was traveling all around the world, connecting with so many people. It really did wake her up, break her open. A tough way to do it. But by societal standards, oh, it was horrible. She had an affair. She cheated on her husband. And at the same time,
trumpet.
Yeah, you know.
But you know what this reminds me of, Paul? This reminds me of all of the twin flame talk going around right now. You know, it's sort of like a twin flame conversation where people are like, oh, I met my twin, which could also be translated as soulmate. But a lot of people have this really intense relationship and it cracks them open and it may or may not work out. But this seems sort of, what year was that generally that happened, that session for you?
That's, well, how long is memories out? It was probably 12 years ago, more or less. Yeah.
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 Very interesting. So do you get people talking about twin flame stuff, or do you contextualize it in another way? I'm just curious, since it's such a buzzword.
Yes, it is a buzzword, and I think that we have to be careful of those things. It's a very personal, a very individual experience, both the session and someone's life. And so I am really transpersonal, client-centered, so I'll use the terminology that the person uses and do my best to understand what they mean by it. We can have many soulmates, and usually a primary one. I'm lucky enough to be with mine in this lifetime after many lifetimes of not, somehow thinking that was a good idea, that we should go our own ways for lifetimes. But when you meet someone that you have a soul connection with, it can be rather difficult to, and sometimes rather inconvenient, to try to fit that into a box in some way.
That's a good way of putting it.
Relates to love. Yeah, I think that soulmate and soul twin flames, this sort of thing, when there's a deep soul connection, then love is a big topic. And there's a love that goes beyond a human sort of love, and it's hard to define, it's hard to fit into something socially acceptable sometimes. And I think it's a big lesson, has been for me, I think it is for all of us, is there are many different kinds of love, right? And so I think be with the person that you feel love for, but there are many that you can love that it's not intended for you to be with them.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think if we can, as we evolve, it's easier to be loving, and not have it go beyond certain boundaries at the same time.
I so agree. It takes the pressure off too, because I think, and this is a sidebar, but I'm just noticing trends in terms of the institution of marriage and relationship, and there's the context of marriage and the structure of marriage has shifted, and why we get married has changed. And I think having access to the ability to detach from relationships in a way that is unhealthy and just really nourishing the healthy part can be so freeing to people. People stay rigid. They're like, but it has to be this thing. This has you have to fulfill me in every way. You have to complete me. And it's like, well,
We have to complete ourselves first. And that's why I really love this inner work. You know, one of the first steps or stages, and I'm working on a book on this. I call it essential healing, which I think is a title you use for your website or for your work as well. And so over the years, I see there are some specific
ooh, you just blipped sort of.
steps or
You like,
stages to healing mental mind, not being stuck in mental mind.
repeat that because we lost a little portion of that.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry. It was
So there are certain steps or stages of healing that I think we all need to experience. And one of the first steps or stages is getting out of the mental mind. And go into the heart. So it's protection around the heart. And the heart is really the doorway into the inner world. So if that's closed and shielded, it's difficult to make that journey deeper within. So once we get that open, we can work with some of the feelings, some of the emotions that are stored there, and continue going deeper. And as we open that heart and work with some of those feelings and emotions, most often one of the big steps towards reconnecting with authentic self is making contact with the child self, the inner child. And there we run into two parts, if you will. There's often the wounded child, the child that's been hurt in some way, and carries that pain and carries the beliefs that have formed around that, and that has developed survival strategies as a result of those pain, of that pain. But there's also the wonder child, this wise and wonderful, more authentic self that lives in there, that's full of creativity and spontaneity and playfulness, that has often, as a result of experiences in life, been lost or put away, or we lose connection with that. And so one of the essential healing steps is to reconnect with this wise and wonderful child within ourselves. And that child self, well, sometimes it requires some healing, right? But that child self is much more connected with, much closer to the authentic self, what I call the soul essence, that core being that we really are. And whatever work I'm doing with someone, if I can see them more than one or two times, my goal or intention is to help them reconnect with, rediscover that authentic self, that soul essence, and bring that forward. So it's not a outside in process, but making contact with that and then letting that break through those survival strategies that cause us so much trouble. So that can begin to manifest both in their body and in their words, in their home, in their life.
how beautiful. And it's so freeing, right? Like people have this perception too that their child, the inner child, is someone that had to be somehow suppressed or muted because they're too silly or they're not serious enough or they haven't, buckled down hard enough. And then, but that aspect is still a longing to be connected aspect of all of us, and how freeing it is to connect with that and realize, oh yeah, one of the things I've been really missing from this wonder child connection is fun. And life doesn't have to really be so hard and full of drudgery.
Yeah, I lost you for a minute there.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely true. And so a parent will, or a teacher will say to a child, "Act your age." Right? Have you heard it? Act your age.
Who hasn't, right?
And what they mean is, act my age, not your age. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the common dynamics is that the playful, spontaneous child feels threatened and abandons the playfulness and the spontaneity, and then prematurely adopts the responsibility and caretaking. Right? They adopt the parent and the adult aspects that really aren't fully developed yet. I know I certainly did. Became this more serious, responsible, caretaking 9-year-old. Well, it makes no sense. It wasn't until I was really in my 40s where I had to go back and reconnect with this child. He'd sort of been waiting for me,
Like,
and
wow, what are we doing here?
I said, "Oh, I'm going to try to connect with you more." And he said, "Don't try, do it."
Very Yodian, Yoda-in.
Yeah.
Isn't that what Yoda says? There is no try, only do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And great wisdom.
Yeah.
Great wisdom,
Yeah. And that's what's so cool about this work too, is everybody is wise when they connect with that essential aspect of themselves, that soul essential being.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. This is cool stuff. So shifting gears, because we really only have about 15 minutes left. Where do you think hypnotherapy is headed? There's another buzzword is consciousness, and it's coming forward in a lot of different realms. Science is coming forward with our understanding on a quantum level, with energy healing, energy medicine, reality shifting, even if some would agree, is on a quantum level. Where do you think hypnotherapy is headed in this kind of pool of consciousness exploration right now? We're frozen. There we are.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's still a lot of misunderstanding around hypnosis and what it is. And one of the things that we're doing in this pilot study with the near-death regression is we have a group of 10 controls, people that had heart attacks, that I'm regressing, but we're not regressing them back to their NDE. Well, some of them may go back there anyway. We'll see. I start with them tomorrow.
Oh, so exciting!
Yeah. But what we're looking at is the efficacy of regression therapy itself. So, I worked with some of the people down at DOPS, the Department of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. Mm-hmm. And they have 30, 40 years of research begun by Ian Stevenson, both with children's spontaneous past life regression memory, past life memory, not regression, past life memory, and then around NDEers, right? And they're working with people that have spontaneous memory, and they question whether or not regression is a valid methodology to help someone recover memories, right?
Mm.
And so what we're looking at with these cardiac arrest patients is having them describe some significant life event, say 21, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and see how much detail they have conscious memory of.
Uh-huh.
And then regress them back to that memory that they described, and see if they get more vivid. Because what we'd like to see is hypnotic regression recognized as a valid method to recover memories from childhood, from womb, from past life, from between life, and from near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
There hasn't been a lot of research on it, but I think that if we can establish the effectiveness and the validity of regression. Of course, people are afraid of false memory or enhanced memory or memory being influenced. Memory is a funny thing, right? You tell one story you have conscious memory of 3 or 4 times, you're going to tell it a bit differently each time. You tell it 10 or 20 times, it becomes even more different, right? And so we're finding so far, again, it's a small study, just a pilot study, but what people had conscious memory of, when they're regressed using hypnosis, they recover many more details, things they had no conscious memory of, and even some things that are different than what they consciously remember.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not surprising, but I think, the audience would be very intrigued to know. And so in this study, which is just so cutting edge and awesome, what happens after the pilot? Are you guys looking to expand the study and come up with a broader scope?
Absolutely. So we need to see the results first. It takes some time to process that because we do a quality of life survey before the session. We do one immediately after. Well, we do one before the session, and then we do one a month after the session to see how it's changed their life in any way. And so this is the second trip there to the hospital in Sudbury, where we're going to do the research. I'll conduct 4 days of sessions, and then in a month they'll be followed up with the survey, and then we'll begin processing the data. That takes time. Luckily, we have a researcher doing that. And then at the August IANS conference, International Association of Near-Death Studies, they hold their conference around the country, different places each year. This year it's going to be in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia.
Cool.
And we'll present the results of this at that conference. So Atilia Costa, the cardiologist.
Oh, sorry, we just blipped out there. I was just wanting the dates. We can share that with people too, because I'll
it's the end of August. It's the last weekend of August. Mm-hmm.
Oh, dang, I won't be able to.
And the 3 of us will present the study for the first time to the public there. Yeah.
Awesome.
And this study was funded. To do a bigger study requires much bigger funding. So hopefully, in this case, a drug company funded it. I'm not sure why, but they did. But we need funding to continue the study. But absolutely, the 3 of us and some others are interested in it now. I think it would be a really important thing to continue on a bigger scale. Yeah.
Do you need subjects? I mean, would it be appropriate to put a shout out to people with particular experiences or cardiac patients that have had a cardiac arrest or anything like that?
Yeah, so for this pilot study, this one cardiologist had enough patients that were willing to do it. You know, it's not an easy topic to discuss, to talk about. Bruce Grayson said something really fascinating. I saw him at the IONS conference in August in Seattle, or outside of Seattle, Bellevue. And he said that he was doing follow-ups with patients that, of course, he interviewed them as a psychiatrist in the hospital when they'd been hospitalized after their near-death experience. And a variety of causes behind the death in that case. And he found that 2 and 3 years later, people were much more likely to tell him that they'd had a near-death experience. And he asked them, well, you know, why didn't you tell me in our first interview? And they said, well, you were the guy deciding whether or not I was mentally stable enough to leave the hospital. And if I started talking about meeting Jesus or Buddha and my dead grandmother, I thought you would never let me go. So I didn't talk about it. Right? And the other thing I think they commonly told him was they were just so unprocessed. You know, they were just in the midst of it. I know for me, for months after my experience, I didn't know what happened. I knew I came close to death. I knew I'd survived. I didn't know why. I knew I was transformed. I was changed in some way, but I didn't know how. Those things that were once important to me seemed much less important, but there were just too many unintegrated aspects of the whole thing to put it together. It really wasn't till about 6 or 9 months later that David Quigley did that regression for me, the somatic regression, where I was able to recover the memories of the near-death experience and then really began to integrate them. So it required releasing the trauma from the body, from 150 million volts, from smashing my head on the pavement, from being dead for I'm not sure how long. All I know is, I was thinking about this last time I spoke about it, was that when I got hit by lightning, it still wasn't raining, right? The storm was coming in. It was on the front of the storm where the lightning struck. And when I became conscious again, when my mental mind became conscious again, I was laying in water that was a foot deep, and hail and rain and wind, and it was a huge storm. So how much time passed, I'm not certain.
Say that one more time,
because we in that get me to.
Sorry to interrupt. You blipped out again. You were saying that the water was this high when you came to?
I was laying next to a storm drain. And it was a huge storm that came. When I got hit, the sun was still out. There was no.
You must have been out for a while.
There was thunder in the distance.
Wow.
So now I know lightning can travel a few minutes, I guess. Yeah.
Wow.
But time's very different in that state. You know, people with NDEs report time. I mean, our linear time and time when you're out of body is very, very different. A fraction of a second in normal time can go very, very slowly in spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think people who have had traumatic experiences will talk about that too, like when there's an accident or something and time changes. And even I find that when I'm in a state of presence, time is a very unusual thing. It's not, I don't even know how to really explain it, but time is variable. It's really variable.
I've many times had a client in my chair for 3-4 hours during a life between life regression, and bringing them back, bringing them out, and they look at me physically and say, whoa, and they don't realize, so there's a kind of time distortion as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. There's so many other things that I want to ask you, and I think I'm probably just going to have to ask you to come back another time, and we're going to do the hot spot next time. Let me look over my questions. So yeah, I want you to be able to shout out all your stuff. So you mentioned very. Go ahead.
Are we okay?
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Okay. So I want to say that if people want to find out more about the trainings I do, they can look on paulaurand.com. And on my YouTube channel, there's a lot of free videos there that show life between life regression, NDE regression, some other excerpts from trainings as well. Just look Paul Aurand on YouTube and you'll see it there.
Paul's the best. If you want to become a hypnotherapy client or learn how to do it, Paul's like the best, in my opinion. Also, you mentioned a book. You want to talk about that a little more, or update us later?
I'll update you later. I'm working on it. We have a proposal that's ready for an agent probably in about a month. And then
how exciting!
It'll be a year, but I've worked on this for a long time, and finally it's taken shape.
I get it. I totally get it. Okay, so you have the IONS conference in August. Are you going to be doing any more speaking? The pause, the long frozen pause.
Mm-hmm. So
sorry,
schedule?
Yeah. Are you
every summer I run a summer school, not to when you were in elementary school or high school. It's actually a fun summer school. We do it in Tuscany in a little town called Pietrasanta near Pisa. That's in July every year. So we do a 2-day essential healing workshop for personal growth and development. And then we do a 6-day hypnotherapy training, and that's followed by a 6-day regression therapy and past life regression training every July. And then here in New York, in Jersey City, we have September and November, the same course, broken up over those 2 months. That's the one you attended to become an instructor. So we have a nice group shaping up for that. And in October, we have an advanced training too for people that are already practicing.
Someone might be going to that.
Yeah, it'd be great. It's almost full.
So okay, we'll just see how the universe drop in, you know? Well, you're going to have to repeat that one again.
Yeah.
Didn't get it.
So thanks for having me.
I love having you, and I hope that you'll want to come on the show again because you're awesome, and I'm sure people are going to be really excited to hear more about what you're doing. And give my best to Sophia, and thank you so much. All right, everybody, until next time, we're going to have you have fun experiences and enjoy life, and we'll be back next time. Take good care.